Are you looking for hope? You've come to the right place. Welcome to Seeds of Hope with Del and Penny. Encouragement for what you face today, tomorrow, and always. And now, here are your hosts, Penny Cook and Del Bates.
Hello and welcome to Seeds of Hope with Del and Penny. I'm Penny Cook and my co-host is Del Bates. Hello, Del.
Hello, Penny.
And we are here to give you hope for what you face today, tomorrow, and always. And we have a very special guest that I know is going to give you hope with his very important topic of grief. So welcome, Jim Magruder.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be with you guys today.
Thank you. And we'll tell you a little bit about Jim. Well, I'd like to tell you that we are on Facebook Live on Vero's Voice magazine. You can catch us there. And also we take our podcast and upload it to your favorite platform, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen. So if you missed the show today, which is Wednesday, and it's June 5th, you can find us anywhere where your favorite podcast is found. So our guest is James Magruder, and he writes reflective essays and contemporary Christian fiction. His first book was The Glimpse, and it was an inspirational novel. And his newest book, which was just released, is The Desert Between Us. It's available on Amazon. He writes, his articles have been published on Writer's Digest, Writer's Journal, and I love this. He has 11 stories in Chicken Soup for the Soul. 11. That's 11. He also blogs about maximizing your life. I love it. And the title is Pause More, Rush Less. And that's the name of his blog. He lives in Wisconsin with his wife. He has 2 adult sons and 3 grandchildren. And if you go on his Facebook page, they are adorable. Welcome, Jim. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So just to tell you a little bit about this book.
Yes.
The story follows Faith Kincaid, whose spouse died from heart attack 2 years ago. Now, at the age of 37, Chase finds himself wondering if he could ever love again. That is, until he meets his son's 3rd grade English teacher, Sierra. She reignites a spark in Chase that he hasn't felt for 2 years. As the two of them bond, Chase battles guilt. Is he betraying Amy's memory? How will his son react? Through this exploration of love and loss, Chase may discover love again if he'll let himself. If not, he'll drift away not only from Sierra, but everything and everyone he loves, being lost forever in a wave of grief. And just that, those words, a wave of grief, really resonated. And I'm sure it will with a lot of listeners and readers. And I think it gave a little taste of your writing style. And as I read, I felt like he's reminding me of another author, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Who might that be? What is who's your writing style like?
Well, I've been compared to 3 people, and I'm humbled by all 3 of them. Nicholas Sparks, of course, Richard Paul Evans, and Dan Walsh. And I know Richard Paul Evans personally. I'm on the phone with him about twice a month.
Wow.
And our styles are very similar. I started following him because he sounded like me, is the way I felt when I read his work. And they always say you should follow other writers that are in your genre and have your style. And I have found that I seem to be similar to them. And Amazon reviews have told me that I'm kind of a mix between those 3. So,
wow. Well, I want to share with our listeners that it is a very easy read book. That is the picture of it. The desert between us, and there's his little house, his what do we call it? The tree house.
The treehouse.
And I know we're going to hear a story about that. But how about if you give us just a little shot how this came about and what's
Okay.
your story?
Yeah. Well, I wrote it to honor my father and to pay tribute to the love he had for my mother and the love he never stopped having, even 43 years after her death. So it was written to honor him and a tribute to their marriage. And I wanted to really celebrate married love. Hollywood talks about all kinds of loves, but never really married love. And I wanted to celebrate married love. And the married love my father and mother had was really something special. She died when I was 11 years old. I'm one of 6 children, so we lost 5 of us, or excuse me, all 6 of us lost our mother. And we ranged in age from age 4 to 14.
Wow.
And after growing up and watching how well he raised all of his children alone, I got to thinking about how could I honor a love like that? How could I write a fictional story with a younger man, not with 6 children, but with 1 son, and still demonstrate how much we can love our spouse? The book has 2 major dramatic questions, and here they are. This is why readers may want to read this book. The first major dramatic question is, if you lose your spouse prematurely, can you give yourself permission to love again? The second dramatic question is, if you can give yourself permission to love again, can you ever love the same again? Can you ever love to that depth? Or will you always hold something in reserve for the one lost? And that's what the main character has to go through, and that's the character arc. He has to figure that out, and the way he does that is what makes up the story.
Well, I love your dialogue through the entire. Your dialogue brings the reader right into the scene. You're right there at the beach. You're right there having lunch with them. I mean, the dialogue just brings you right in. And you don't feel like you're reading some strange book. You're at lunch with them. You're sitting there, you have an ice cream cone with them. You feel like you're just right there.
Yeah.
And,
well, thank you for that compliment. A number of people have said that I feel like I'm sitting alongside them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think part of that would be due to the fact that the questions the young boy, the 8-year-old, his name is Clay, happens to be the name of my grandson. But nevertheless, he's asking his father questions like, why did mom have to die?
Yeah.
And these are the kinds of questions that I asked my father and I wondered about when I lost my mother. And so the writing is filled with emotion because I'm not just the author, I'm the character. In this case, the young boy.
Yeah, and that emotion is seen through the dialogue as well. You said, this is based not necessarily on a true story, but you took a story true, something that happened to you, and made a fictional story out of it. But the message is true, and as you said, the emotion is true. And that really resonated with me when you said that.
Yeah, it's that is all real. The situation may be different. Maybe my conversation with my father was, in the living room. This conversation took place by the ocean on the beach.
Right.
So you change the circumstance, but all of the emotion of it is still the same.
Yeah. Now, is your father still alive?
He's not now. He died of Alzheimer's in 2008.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the last things he lost, even after he forgot who I was, one of the last things he forgot was his wife, my mother.
Wow.
It was amazing. Even the disease couldn't stop that until
yeah.
Mm.
So I think in the book, your mother's name is the mother is Amy. What was your mom's name?
My mother's name was Rosemary.
Oh, Rosemary. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't use her name. I've used a lot of names in our family throughout the book,
That's
but
awesome.
I didn't use my mother's name. Even the name of the coffee shop is one of the grandchildren of my brother. So,
Oh,
and you may not have gotten that far yet, but nevertheless, there's family names throughout the whole thing because, they say there's always an author always writes at least one of his books for himself.
yeah.
And I think this will be it for me. This will be the book that always means the most to me because
You make me
it's
cry.
it's my family. And as I've said, I've spilled my heart all over the pages of this book. I edited it 5 times myself before it even got to the publisher.
Mm,
I wanted to make sure it was right. And then they were very pleased with it because they told me it was one of the cleanest manuscripts they've
mhm,
seen.
mhm.
So that worked out well.
Great. So you have an intriguing title.
Yes.
Title is The Desert Between Us, yet there's a treehouse on the cover. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, Penny, I'll tell you about half of that, but I won't tell you the whole thing. Number one, I'm not going to tell anyone why is there a treehouse on the cover when the title is The Desert Between Us. What does the desert have to do with the treehouse? Well, there are 2 different things going on that cover, and I'll explain the title, but I'm not going to tell you about the treehouse because I don't want to ruin a surprise as you read the story and as your readers do. The desert between us is a metaphor, and I'm using that metaphor to explain how 2 people feel when they've lost their spouse or fiance, and then they decide to give themselves permission to love again. So let's say on one side, you have the main character, Chase Kincaid, who lost his wife due to death. On the other side is his new love interest years later. She lost a fiance due to him being unfaithful.
Hmm.
So Chase's big question is, can I love again? Sierra's big question is, can I trust again?
Oh,
And look at what's in between them. There's a desert of loneliness between
wow.
us. And that desert is a desert of loneliness. It's a desert of a lack of trust. It's a desert of doubt. Will I ever
Mhm.
find anybody that I can love to the same degree? And eventually, when people begin to heal, the desert gets smaller and they meet in the middle and they
Wow.
decide, I can love you. I can go on again.
Wow.
But until they go through all of the baggage that both of them have to go through, there's a desert between them.
Hmm.
And that's the gist of the title.
I hope somebody
Wow.
picks this up as a movie.
Yes.
Well, I've been getting reviews too saying, boy, I hope they make this into a movie. I
Yes.
try to write for cinema. That's a goal,
Uh-huh.
to make it easy to convert to a screenplay as best I can.
Well, you have a lot of the dialogue that would be just perfect. Someone could just transform it right, into the movie.
Yeah.
So there's somewhere in the book that you actually, I can't remember exactly how it's said, but I think it's Chase, and I think he might be talking to his friend Jack. And
Yes.
he says, I don't mind being alone, or I like being alone, but I don't like being lonely. And I
Yeah.
thought, what? I mean, that's so true because how many people do like being alone? You like reading alone, you like doing things. But then when you bring it to the second half, but I don't like being lonely. I'm like, whew, that emotion,
Yeah.
it grabs you through the book.
Yeah. Well, I've often thought about that when it was busy and the kids were young and my wife was here and everything, and there's a lot of activity going on. I'd come home sometimes and maybe they'd be all out shopping. And I would say, oh, great, I got the house to myself.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sit down and write. I'm really gonna enjoy this. Okay. But then in the back of my mind, I would say, I can enjoy this because I know they're coming back.
Yeah. Right.
If they don't come back, if they never come back,
Mhm.
well, now being alone just translated into being
Right.
lonely. And I don't want to be lonely, but I'll take my space once in a while, right?
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Can I ask a question now? Through the
Sure.
book, you talk about at what I love is at night after Chase has had a day, he takes his journal and he'll sit down, sit by the ocean, and he'll write. So what do you find him, how do you find him healing through journaling? Because that's a
Well,
big part each night.
yeah, that's a big, the journal is a major device in the book. And the reason I introduced that was, number one, I've done that. I've filled several journals in my life, but journaling, what journaling does is journaling translates or transforms an emotional process into a logical one.
Mm,
When we are so filled with emotion that we don't really know how we feel or how we're going to cope or how we're going to get through something, if
mm,
we write about it and we journal about it, we can see how we feel on the page. And when you can see how you feel, you can process it.
mm.
And it can become more logical to you that, oh, this is how I feel. This is why I do what I do. This now makes sense. This is
Mm.
why I'm struggling to love again, because I won't let go of what I'm
Wow.
comparing. I'm comparing too much. I'm
Mhm.
comparing everybody I date to my lost wife. And that's why I say, I think journaling translates or transforms an emotional process into a logical one where you can
Wow.
see how you feel. And if you can see how you feel, you can process that. And if you can see how you feel, you can heal because you can figure it out.
Wow.
Practical standpoint, journaling slows you down and quiets you down so you can hear the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
Yes, I love
yeah,
that, Penny. I
yeah,
love that. Wow. And that's pretty much what your blog is. Pause more, rush less, you
exactly
know?
right. It's about if we
And
slow our lives down enough, they can
wow,
be so much more meaningful to us.
right.
You know, and here's the other thing about journaling. I've said this in my blog before, that journaling allows you to live your life twice.
Mm,
First, you've lived it and experienced it the first time. The second time, when you journal about it, you can then process
right.
what that experience was like. So you're living your life twice when you
Mm.
write about something you've already once experienced.
You know, and it's interesting too, because we're authors, and what do we all belong to? Critique groups. And the
Yes,
purpose for the critique group is to bring our writing and have others help us and critique it. So I never thought about this, but journaling can help us even critique our own life.
I believe you can.
You
Yeah,
know, we're
yeah,
reading this and we're like, why did I say that? Why did I do that? I wonder what it would have been like if I would have changed my words or something, you know, just coming from that critique point of view.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And the second value of writing is who it benefits. You know, someday after we're gone, I've got a few journals on the bookshelf behind me, and I want my sons to take those and
Mm,
read those and see what I was thinking. At the same time, they might have been thinking something totally different. Like here's one good example is my oldest son just turned 40, for example, last week. Well, if he pulled this journal off, he could see how I wrote about how I felt about turning 40.
wow.
And now he can read about that and realize, you know what, dad feels like I feel.
Mm,
And his life was like my life. Um, and we can relate to each other that much better, right? Because he can see that, oh, I got my father's feelings right on the page here.
right,
Like a little window into your soul.
right.
Yeah, yeah. But so by journaling, not only do you benefit yourself, you benefit uh, your children, your wife, whatever, your spouse,
Right.
um, that kind of thing. So it's never a waste.
No, no,
I
never.
love what you say regarding your wife, that you said in the book that this is a love letter to your wife. I thought, oh my gosh, is that touching? You know,
Yeah,
that's like just a letter to her, just opening up to her, and oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah,
It
I
was
wanted her
beautiful.
to realize that someday, after I'm gone, when she rereads this story again, which I know she will, she'll know that behind it all, in addition to wanting to honor my father, I wanted to leave it as a love letter to her because I talk
Mhm.
about the depth of love and the
Yeah,
value and beauty of married love, you know?
right.
That's beautiful. So I'm curious about your research because every book that
Yeah.
takes a certain amount of research. And I'm curious about your research for this one.
Okay. Well, thank you for asking. I did both secondary and primary research. The secondary research would be all internet research where I'm looking at statistics and things of that nature and reading about how people recover from grief. I read 4 booklets or books on grief. I studied the Kubler-Ross, you know, uh, uh, program of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, all those kind of things. And then after I was done with all the secondary research, Penny, then what I did was primary research, where I started reaching out to people who have lost their spouse and
Mm.
asked, can I interview you and
Wow.
talk about what was the hardest part?
Hmm.
How did you recover? What worked for you? These type of things. I did a number of couples that way. I did the same thing with couples who have been divorced. So I could understand the difference in pain level between a loss from
Mm.
death versus a loss from divorce. And a lot of that is in the book because Chase's father, of course, lost his wife. Chase, of course, lost his wife. And then Chase's best friend, Jack,
Right.
was divorced. And they'll get into some real discussions about what's
Mhm.
worse. And I wanted to include both groups of people who have been through that and then arrive at some sort of conclusion.
Mhm.
Um, and so I do, and that's where that goes. And talking to people live who've been through this pain was really the most instrumental for writing.
Mm.
Um, and the people I've interviewed have since read the book and told me I nailed it. So I'm happy for that.
No, that's good. I'm glad
Wow.
just for the listener, the reader.
Hmm.
That's why I wanted to know about the research because I was pretty sure, just from how much I've read, that you knew what you were talking about.
Right.
Yeah. And everybody's situation may be different, but there are certain things that are the same
Hmm.
Yeah.
in terms of how empty you feel.
Hmm.
In the divorce situation, when he'll talk about that, where he's got the added stress of running into the ex-spouse in the
Oh,
grocery
right.
store,
Right.
and what that's like, particularly in this case where um, it was her idea to move on without him, and how that feels to be left behind.
Mm. Wow.
You know?
It's interesting because we know in novels you would do research if you're doing it like in another country or another setting, but to do this type of research had to touch you more inside as you
Yeah,
were doing it to hear others' emotional what they went through and then how they healed from that.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And that's why when I took notes from what they were telling me, some of their phrases I put right in the book.
Wow.
So they would recognize those phrases. Um, and I drew their attention to those phrases after the book was published so that I wouldn't be misquoting and I wouldn't,
Hmm.
I'd be as accurate as possible.
Yeah. That's good.
Wow. Now, how long did it take you to write? That was one of my questions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? It should have gone much quicker than it did, but it took
Okay.
about 2 years to write this one because life intervened.
It happens.
Life happens when we have other plans, right? Isn't
Right.
that the saying? And so a number of things would come up that would stop me, and then I get
Right.
started again.
Wow.
But research slowed things down too, and waiting
Right.
to meet with people and all these kind of things. So it took me about 2 years to write it after
Wow.
thinking about it for 10 years. My good friend, his name's Dave Dreyer. We meet every other Friday and have for 32 years or 34 years or something,
Oh,
maybe longer. And he said, Jim, this subject of love after loss, victory over grief has been on your heart. It's been parked. He used the term parked on your heart
yeah.
for at least a decade. You should write this. And so I did.
Mhm.
But that's how long it took. It shouldn't have taken that long, but
I think when I met you, that had to be 2 years ago, 2 years
yeah,
in August in at Kyle's
yeah,
camp.
intensive, the fiction intensive.
So
yeah.
were you writing it then? Or because I remember you talking about what it was, because I was sharing my story about my son, but were you actually writing it then, or it was still in your mind?
No, it was by that time it had been finished and it was at
Oh,
the
okay.
publisher, and the
Okay.
publisher was saying, boy, is this clean.
Wow.
This is nice. But then remember, it's at the publisher for 18 months before it's released because it's
Yeah.
in line. There's all these other books ahead of it, and it had to be edited. There's 5
Right.
stages of editing when it's at the publisher.
Right. Right.
So even the publishing process is
Yes.
a long process. It's just the way it works, no matter who the publisher is.
Yeah, Penny and I have she's gone through it with her book, and I know with my book was supposed to be out for Christmas, then Easter, then Mother's Day, and I just found out yesterday the launch date is November 20th. So, and that's a children's book, but that's how long. And I signed with them in August, so it is 15 months. And
Yes.
never did I think it would take that long.
It just does, because there's so many
Yeah.
other books ahead of it too. And I worked with a publisher named Endgame Press, and they've
Right.
been fantastic. Everything
Yeah.
they said basically came true. I mean, they put a publication date in the contract when I signed the contract
Oh, wow.
a year and a half ago, and that book rolled out right on that day.
Wow.
So Endgame Press did a fabulous job. I'm really, really happy with
And that's
working with them.
Victoria, so we just give her a clap.
Yeah, Victoria Duerstock, man, she's
Yeah.
amazing. And the whole organization, and Hope Bollinger,
And
the
Michelle.
editor, Michelle
Yeah,
Medlock
Medlock
Adams.
Adams. Yeah.
They're amazing group.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like the listener to know about the book?
I think just that I have some takeaways I'd like to leave with them to be thinking about.
Please.
And that is what the book strives to do. And I think does a very good job of it, especially considering it's fiction. This is not a nonfiction book. This is a story you're going to enjoy, and you can sit on the margins, if you will, and look in and see what the characters do. But at the same time, learn something about how you can deal with your own personal grief. And that is, some of the takeaways are, number one, give yourself permission to grieve. Some people don't give themselves permission to grieve, or they speed up the process. So number one, give yourself permission to grieve. And after you give yourself permission to grieve, during that process, also give yourself permission to love again.
Wow.
At the end of the book, the very last pages, that's why don't go the last page ahead. I state there's what's called a special note from the author. And I tell you what my father did. And I don't want you to understand or to read what he did, what his thinking was, until you finish the book. The second thing I want you to emphasize, or I emphasize, is if you feel it, you can heal it. So you need to feel your grief and not stuff it. And a lot of that has to do with having a good cleansing cry. It's important to vent. Another thing to do is, we've mentioned before, journal your feelings. Journaling is really helpful to help you heal. Also, obviously, scripture. I would study scripture.
Wow.
Some of the verses I've always loved in scripture is James 4:8, draw near unto God, and he will draw near unto you. And probably my favorite verse is Psalm 34:8. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit.
Right.
And that's that's how we feel. Write a letter to God, something you can be thinking about. Write a letter to the loved one lost and tell her how much you miss them. Now, people might say, well, why would you write a letter to someone who's passed? And let me just say this, that the benefit is not what you do with the letter. The benefit is having written, because of what comes out. Talking to your spouse at the gravesite, there's a couple scenes like that in this book that are pretty emotional too, that bring healing. And then there's other things you can do, like exercise and listening to music and talking with friends. I really emphasize the role of friendship in this book is really something. A lot of people have told me they love the Jack character, and he's the best friend of the main character.
Yeah.
And how they help each other heal.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I have a little trouble thinking of it as a fictional book. Even.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the characters are made up, but the story isn't, and the emotion isn't.
Right.
And it makes it so real and relatable.
Yeah. I thank you for that compliment. I think that's very accurate, that the emotion does make it real. And that is feedback I'm getting. So you guys are on point.
I believe that's why it could become a movie, because the emotion is there, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah.
You were the boy in this story. You
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah.
Right.
You're telling it from those feelings. Let's put
Mhm.
Right. Right. I was definitely the boy in the story. And that's why they'll say, was it autobiographical?
Mhm.
And I have added enough fiction to make sure it's a fiction book, but
Mhm.
I took all of let's say, put it this way, I took the human condition and really
Mhm.
painted a picture of how you feel in those situations.
very good.
Well, if our listeners want to find you, Jim, how would they find you?
Well, you can find me on my website, which is James C. I always say C as in Charles, even though my middle name is Curtis, because people might use a K. So it's James C.
Uh-huh.
as in Charles, Magruder, Magruder.com. That's my website, jamescmagruder.com. Or you can reach me on my email, which is James C. again, Magruder, Magruder @gmail.com. And I'm also on Facebook at jim.magruder.35. The same, and Twitter is at James C. Magruder. So I think those are the main ways you can get me. And you can find the book at Amazon,
Right.
of course, and you can find it at christianbooks.com.
Mhm.
And of course, you can go directly to the publisher, Endgame Press, if you'd like, just at endgamepress.com.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
I
encourage
yeah, I would say go ahead.
because everyone will be able to relate.
Yes.
Way.
Yes.
Everyone has experienced grief to some extent in a way. So this is a great book. I thank you for pouring your heart out on those pages the way you did.
Oh, thank you.
Right. So I have to ask, what do you have coming up next? What's next in the?
Well, my agent has another book I wrote while I was waiting for this one to come out from the publisher. It's called The Christmas Photograph.
Oh.
And it's a Christmas novella, about 45,000 words. It's a story of how an old 58-year-old Christmas photograph that's missing, but when they find it, has the power to reunite a grandfather, son, and grandson.
Wow.
Once they see it, because they've earlier in life, they went through a traumatic accident
Uh-huh.
and it strained the relationship. And so the grandson, in an attempt to help his grandfather and his father reunite, he's trying to find a Christmas photograph that was the last time they were happy together.
Wow.
And where they find it and the circumstances are what make up the story. And the pressure of why do you have to find it this Christmas is because the grandfather is elderly and suffering from Alzheimer's. And of course, my father died of complications of Alzheimer's. So I'll be writing about that from the viewpoint of having lived through it.
Oh my gosh, we're going to have you back on for that one.
Yeah. I just love that story, the Christmas
Yeah.
photograph.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I hope they pick that up and I can share that with people because I think that'll help too with all the people who have dealt with Alzheimer's and
Yeah.
as caregivers or whatever.
Mhm. Well, thank you again, Jim. I cannot wait for people to get this. And
Yes.
we encourage you all to get it, read it, and you will want his Christmas book when you get done, I know.
Yeah, I think you will. I'm going to just hold it up if people can see the
you
title.
are.
It's that, and there's your treehouse. It's
The Desert Between Us by
right.
the
James.
Yep.
Yes.
James C. Magruder, correct. Thank you
Well,
so much, you guys.
Wow, thank you. Oh, we've been waiting for this one, but thank you so much for being here. And good luck on the next one, and we'll be watching for it. And we thank our listeners for listening today, and we just pray as we close that your book and even just your interview and how you've shared and opened your heart up today, that will touch those who may be suffering grief, hurt in any way. So thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
next week, we've got another interesting guest for you.
Yes, we do. So we'll see you.
Here, God bless.